Hello, everybody, and welcome to Macstaff Live. I'm your host today, Martin Crowson. Welcome. I'm joined today in the studio to discuss what might be quite a fruity discussion. We're here to question whether the problems that the UK economy is currently going through at the moment are just simply cyclical and are bound to change in the future, or whether it's time for a really serious look and rethink about capitalism in the UK and whether it's actually working. I'm joined today, as usual, by the MD of Macstaff, Anthony McCormack. Hello, Ant. How are you?
Hey, Martin. Great. Thanks. Yeah, good to see you again.
And I'll let you, Ant, introduce our special guest today. Welcome to Sarah Bishop, who's the owner of RecruitRecruit. Over to you, Ant.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, I'm really kind of pleased, honoured to grab kind of Sarah Bishop for this. Bish, as she's known to her friends, and like me, she's a kind of recruitment kind of business owner of RecruitRecruit. So good that they named it twice. She's a tech entrepreneur. I think it's called Matching for You as well, like a good platform that she's kind of launched recently, and a co-team member. So I'd like to call her a friend. We're both members of team, and welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thanks, Ant. Yeah, looking forward to it. Initially, when I said yes, I thought we was going to be talking about recruitment, so this should be quite fun.
Yeah. So let's put you in the hot seat, Sarah, straight away. What are your thoughts on the current situation in the UK with the economy? Always with a nudge to recruitment in the end, but let's start with, is it time for a rethink? What's going on?
I think when you said, is it just cyclical? Yeah, I think, of course, there are elements of that. We only need to look back at history, don't we? And we see that most things are cyclical. We know that recessions tend to come at relatively regular periods. But I think it's a time for a rethink, just full stop, quite frankly. The way that we're doing a lot of things. If you look, we're talking about capitalism. I'm not anti-capitalism, despite how it may come across a little bit. We'll talk about that. But I think perhaps it needs to be done differently. I mean, what other things do you know that we expect to grow infinitely? Trees don't carry on growing, do they? Even giant sequoias they stop growing. They know their limits, don't they, to a certain stage. But we keep expecting the economy to grow infinitely. Why can't we be happy with, I don't know, 25-30% net profits? Why do we have to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more and more and more stuff that we can't necessarily spend, and irrespective of the damage that it's doing behind the scenes? So yeah, that's where I'm at on it. I hope you didn't want a short answer to that. Not
necessarily the system, but the way you look at the system.
Yeah, no, I think the way we look at it, but I think the system needs tweaking. Our version of capitalism is something that we've had in place now for a very long time, and it's broken, or elements of it are broken, not all of it. As systems go, it's one of the better systems that we've got. But there are elements of it that are broken and no longer fit for purpose. And I think rather than everybody kind of sitting back and going, it's the best system, we have to, purge forwards with it, that sometimes we have to go, okay, some parts of it just aren't fit for purpose anymore. It's like most people would agree that the current education system in Britain, for example, is no longer fit for purpose. Kids need to be learning coding and perhaps emotional and mental well-being and all those things. And it's the same with capitalism, in my opinion.
Anthony, over to you. Is some parts of the system broken, or is this just a cyclical bit?
Yeah, so I've been having a read and having a think, and kind of my default setting, I guess, would be, I'm a little right wing, and I kind of believe that Conservatives are the party of business and all that stuff. But I'm a church guy as well, and the kind of I've been wanting kind of some social justice with my capitalism recently, and it's like, how about looking after all of the humans rather than like the top echelon and things like that. But I kind of like the reward of ambition and innovation and entrepreneurship and everything like that. So it's a bit of a difficult one. I do concede that it seems that the capitalism, like as we're running it in the UK, is not working for everybody. It's not working for most people, actually, and there's just stuff wrong, isn't there, where to earners are working, in a household and they still can't afford the mortgage and things like that. And the cost of living crisis have really put the squeeze on that. But I've been thinking there must be a better way. It's just that I don't like any of the other options either. So
just to go back a little bit there, Anthony, on what you just said there, just how much has that nibbled away at you? The point you mentioned a moment ago there about the people at the lower ends of economic income who are really, really struggling at the moment. Is that something that you've found particularly profound at the moment?
Yeah. So I do kind of feel a lot of empathy for that, and there's a lot of people struggling, and there's a lot of people, for whom the system is definitely not working. So, it's the job of the system to work for everybody, surely, isn't it? And we'll probably come on to it, but there's literally issues of long-term unemployment and even like generational unemployment and things like that. And these these people in society have kind of checked out, haven't they? I'd like a universal kind of system which kind of works for everybody and brings everybody along. And we'll probably come on to it, but there are success stories of economies that pursue full employment and things like that, and there's good education and joined up training and support and things like that. And I've also read that like inequality, and I'm getting increasingly uncomfortable with the gap between rich and poor, like inequality breeds lots of other kind of social problems and doesn't even kind of stimulate economic growth. It's kind of the opposite from what I've found out. And people will be thinking I'm going crazy or going soft for kind of taking such a standpoint, but I've said before, I'm a lifelong learner, haven't I? That means that I have to review new information and come to new conclusions. And it's just common sense, isn't it? If something's not working, you have to think of a different way around it. So I'm just on that journey, I suppose.
Before we go to right the other end of the argument, let's start at the other end of the argument and then work our way back and ask Sarah, if we go right to the other end, is a sort of socialist society ever possible in this country?
I'm glad you asked this question. All right. Now, there is a danger I could really bang on about this, but let me start by saying I think one of the reasons, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you invited me on to talk about this in particular is you see me having a proper bloody rant on Facebook, on Twitter or Facebook and all these sorts of things about I've tried to rein it in a little bit because I think people just getting a bit sick of me bitching about politics, quite frankly.
You do you.
So just to rewind a little bit, I traditionally, and a lot of people will be surprised to hear this, I actually traditionally voted Conservative for the very same belief that I thought that they were the party of business. And that largely came, I started questioning and reading more and looking into things more when the whole Brexit debacle came up. So I'm very pro-Remain. I've got an Austrian wife who lives and works in Vienna. So from a personal point of view, but also economically and all the other stuff, we won't get into Brexit, but all the other stuff, thought it wasn't a great idea and still think it's tantamount to treason. But anyway, so that whole debate sparked me getting more interested in politics, because I essentially, when I was 18, went, yeah, I can vote this year. My dad went, who are you going to vote for? And I went, the Green Party, because I was about to go to university to read environmental science, which is what I did. And he just went, their economic policy doesn't stand up to scrutiny. And I went, all right then, and just started voting Conservative like my dad did, right? Even though my dad was very much working class, came from, he had his own business. He'd come from very, very poor upbringing in rural Kent. But anyway, I started looking at things. And when you look at it, so a couple of truths are that economically, largely, when you look at the actual economic data, it doesn't really matter which party's in. Both parties will have recessions. Some of them are globally triggered. Some of them are triggered by, I don't know, stupid political policies, for example. And it doesn't really make much difference who's in. Yeah. That was the first thing. The second thing was, I've always believed in trickle-down economics, which is something that you've kind of alluded to in that, very much believed in that. And it's a myth. It's one of the most interesting reads on that. It was a paper study, 18-year study across 50 50-year study, 5 decades of
Wow.
study across 18 OECD countries, and they've completely debunked the trickle-down economics. Okay, in fact, trickle-up works better, particularly when it comes to equality. Getting back to, can socialism work here? I think part of the biggest problem that we have in the UK is political ignorance, and people misunderstand. They misunderstand what capitalism is. So the actual definition is an economic and political system where the trade and industry is controlled by private owners purely for profit. Then socialism at the other end is the means of production, distribution, exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole, which is what we generally understand as communism. And then the minute people start saying socialism in the UK, everyone's like, oh, bloody Bolsheviks, communists, whatever. And I think what most people are actually talking about, what we need is democratic socialism, which is basically almost like a mix. So I believe that our infrastructure, there's certain things that should belong to the country. So I think we should have water security, energy security, food security, for example. I just think that those are basic, common human rights that we should have. If you look at, and I was saying earlier before we came online, so I live 6 months of the year in Vienna, and living in a country, excuse me, is quite different to when you just, you sort of travel on holiday. And, I don't think there's any perfect situation, but I look at Austria, which has been democratic socialism for a long time, and it works a lot better. They haven't got huge equality gaps, like we have, certainly nowhere near like the way we have. The infrastructure works, for the most part. The public transport is clean, it's efficient, it's cheap. Vienna is regularly voted the #1 city for quality of life, like year in, year out. And do I think it could work here? Well, yeah, because it works in a lot of countries around the world. So why shouldn't it? And what always baffles me is quite often, this is a bit stereotyping, but quite often the people that bang on the most about how great Great Britain is are the ones that then say, oh, well, that can't work here. But why not? Are we lesser? Surely if there's a model that works, all you've got to do is follow what they've done. It's as a recipe. So, and the democratic socialism doesn't mean that you don't have capitalism and competition. You still have it. I mean, Red Bull is a big Austrian brand. That's an Austrian company. Spar, Spar, our local, right. That's an Austrian company. There are millionaires and billionaires in Austria. But they've also, and then it's the knock-on effects as well, isn't it? So many things are counterintuitive. The knock-on effects, the safest countries in the world. Most of us want to live where quality of life is good for all, hopefully, and the safest. And we don't rank anywhere near the top of the scales on either of those. But nearly every single country that does has got some form of democratic socialism and has done for some time. So for me, it's like, well, if it can work somewhere else and it's proven, then why can't it work here? You look at like quality of life rankings, Netherlands, Denmark, Switzerland, Luxembourg, Finland, Iceland, Austria, Oman, bit of an outlier, Australia and Norway, all democratic socialists, the safest countries on the planet, Iceland, New Zealand, Ireland, Denmark, Austria, Portugal, Slovenia, Czech Republic, Singapore, and Japan. If we want those things, surely we need to start looking at how they do things.
And let's move over to you at this point. Do you agree with what Sarah's saying? And where do you sit on this? It can't happen in Great Britain or the UK.
Yeah, so I agree with all that, definitely. When I've thought about this before, I've been quite kind of confident and kind of smug in my standpoint that, well, socialism like never works, does it? And what do we want to be, like Russia or China? It's like, take your pick. What's the country in South America that's kind of imploding at the moment as well? Everybody crossing the border into kind of Brazil and Mexico or whatever, because that's not working so well either, is it? But then I kind of stumbled across this kind of, that I think Sarah's read as well, like Viking economics book, and like it's been hiding in plain sight the whole time. The kind of most stable and highest performing economies that also score kind of top 5 in quality of life and safety and everything like that are the Nordic countries. So, what are they up to in particularly Norway, but like Iceland and Sweden and whatever, and they do have like a high tax, which makes capitalists recoil, doesn't it? A high tax economy, but we're not exactly alien to the concept in every other aspect of our life of appreciating quality and that you get what you pay for and things like that. And they like investing in the things that are for the for the common good of the country, and they've done other things that are kind of unpopular in some Western countries, like regulated the kind of the banking sector closely and things like that. And there's a lot of success story in there. So I do encourage that you read that, Viking Economics by George Lakey. And then I start kind of unpicking my own arguments even further. And that, well, do we really want to be like the US either? With their polarization and incarceration, and the economy is not even doing that well anyway. And it's the kind of the boom and bust stuff that always happens, like with the short term kind of focus of companies and their kind of government cycles and things like that. So like, what did you call it? Social
democratic socialism.
Democratic socialism.
Yeah.
So kind of sounds good. And I did have a concern, and you kind of touched on it. I mentioned at the beginning as well. So it's like, if I want some of those things, like what's the route to it in the UK? Because I'd take a lot of convincing to vote for the Labour Party, I think, at the moment.
I didn't think I could revile anybody more than Tony Blair, because I think, quite frankly, we're recruiters, we're trained to read people. I always felt that he was an insincere shite, quite frankly.
He was trained to do his body language, wasn't it?
And so and he was quite transparently very insincere. But anyway, he also completely ruined a night to see Madame Butterfly with my grandmother at the Albert Hall one night, because Captain Pinkerton, the guy playing the tenor, playing Captain Pinkerton, came out on stage. He was the spitting image of Tony Blair, and it pissed me off all night. Honestly, I could not enjoy the performance. Anyway, so
we digress.
We digress. So
do you both think that we've gone down a road so far towards economic pain at the moment that the people who would recoil normally when we look at Scandinavia, it's nice over there, and everyone goes, no, but they've got high taxes. Do you think we've reached a stage where more and more people are now starting to think, I don't care about the high tax situation over there, they've got a system that works and it's time we looked at it? Are we there yet or not?
Well, I think most people have agreed that, if they could afford it, they would pay, if everything was better for everybody. Most people have agreed, haven't they? They've said they'd pay more into the system. We've had letters from billionaires and millionaires saying to the, during COVID and that, saying you need to be taxing us more. And again, it comes back. There's been several studies, largely from King's College London and the London School of Economics, and studies throughout the globe, that have shown that cutting tax for the rich doesn't impact the economy. It doesn't help to grow the economy. It benefits the rich and the rich only. So I think it's again, things like austerity, and it's difficult, isn't it? Because they sound like sensible things to do, don't they? They sound like sensible things to do. We're having a recession, the country's really struggling, let's put in measures of austerity. But then when you look at other countries, the democratic socialist countries, they start pumping more into the system. They largely get out of recession more quickly. You just need to look at the stats. And they also then don't spend the next decade trying to mop up all the social shite, basically, that it's because if you're growing the inequality gap, you're increasing violent crime goes up, crime in general goes up. You have all these other social things that even if you're going to be very mercenary and just talk about the money, it's very expensive to try and put right.
And we've got a productivity problem in the UK as well, haven't we? And productivity, even if it's surprising, is very high in these Nordic countries as well. And what I was even more surprised about is that there's a positive correlation between trade union involvement and productivity and healthy GDP growth as well. Like, so I've always thought, well, are they being militant? Are they being a barrier to efficiency and things like that? But they actually work well together, because once you can't undercut on labor rates and you have to pay people a fair to good salary, you can't get your efficiency from that saving. You have to think of other ways, which is genuinely to get better. And I want the conservative message of that high wage, high skill, high tech economy, but it's just how we get there, basically. And we haven't touched on UBI either, have we? The kind of universal basic income, which I think has been kind of done effectively in Norway as well, or at least they support people for a full year in transition, from one job to another if they're made redundant or whatever. And that it's just the mindset that it's that full employment is the job of the country and the system, and if somebody's not employed, that's a failing of the country and the system, not the individual. So they kind of work all on the same page and goal.
Apparently, I read, I think it was either yesterday or the day before, that they're actually looking to trial a UBI in the UK. I think with some bullshit number of 30 people, but it's a step in the right direction. Going back, Martin, to your question about could we ever do it in the UK, or what, I think one of the first steps is actually getting proportional representation in place, so that we've got a truly democratic parliament that does represent the parties, because I don't think it should be a two-horse race. I don't think the population of what are we, 70 million people, how can we possibly be served by two parties? And that would be the first thing, because if you got people saying, oh, well, it's the lesser of two evils, or not bothering to vote at all, or, oh, I would vote Green, or I would vote for my independent, but there's no point, then how can that be democratic? I just don't see. And I think from there, that's how you then start to affect the rest of the change. It's not going to be overnight. We don't want any civil unrest, do we, Ants? So
I don't like it, no, but I think that some of these gains have been hard fought in other countries as well, and sometimes it comes to that. So I don't know.
And some have actually been. Do you know what? When people say the one thing that you actually need, there's only one thing that you actually need to catalyze any of this change, and that is the will. That is the will. And our politicians haven't got the will to do it, because irrespective, largely, and I don't believe this, they're all just the same. I don't believe out of even just 650 sitting MPs that there is not one single person who's in there for the right reasons. But I do think that largely it's become about party interests and personal interests, and they're paid to put our interests and the nation's interests, and they're not doing it. So if the system allows for this level of corruption, this level of not actually representing the people of the country, then it's the system that needs changing, not the politicians, because you just end up rinsing and repeating, don't you?
And it's a lack of trust in politicians and corporations as well, isn't it? And that comes from inequality too. And I think you bang on about proportional representation or PR, but like the dichotomy is that what kind of ruling party in their right minds are going to put that in order to put themselves out as well. But it'd be interesting to see what the election would look like under the other system.
Yeah, exactly. But and again, that's where it comes down. It's about protecting the party, and that's not what their job is. It's not what they're paid to do.
Because we're starting to get pushed for time a little bit, folks, let's just look at your own industry and just be interested in your views, starting with Ant first, about whether the system which we're talking about, whether it be a Labour or Conservative government, genuinely has an effect on the recruitment industry or not.
And I'm going to go with no. I think I'm on board with what Bish was saying about that irrespective of what party's in, the cycle runs itself, and the the manifesto differences are actually very little, economically, in between, say, the Conservative and the Labour Party. So I'm kind of agnostic from a business point of view, really. And I guess if we were going to more down the socialist kind of end of the spectrum, then actually the regular, recruitment industry and companies that we're in might have kind of less scope, or it'd certainly be different. But I'm not about to kind of withhold my support for system change for the benefit of the whole country and everybody in it, just because I'm concerned that I might make less placements or something. But or certainly traditional thinking is that the more capitalist, the more benefit or opportunity for entrepreneurs like myself. But not sure.
Sarah, over to you. I know you just touched on it briefly earlier, but
I think it could be a really interesting landscape for recruiters, actually, because particularly if we start embracing that, if all the things that we talked about were things that were sensibly implemented, if you think, we've all had that dream, haven't we, of winning the lottery and all the things that you do. Now, most people, after the mansions and the holidays and helping out the family, most people have this kind of charitable and philanthropic kind of thing that they'd like to do. Yeah. So whether it be like a wholesale thing or a specific group that they'd like to target. So, so with like UBI, if you give people the means to create something, if they're not sitting around being financially distressed and, not being able to do anything, we could create a lot more opportunity. As I say, we look at taking the Nordics as an example again, we look at their economies, and they're largely doing all right. So, recruiters do all right when the economy is thriving, because there's more opportunity for everybody.
And the entrepreneurs stay in those countries and don't mind paying the high taxes because they see all the kind of the long-term benefits, don't they?
Absolutely.
As well. And all kind of big entrepreneurs turn philanthropic in the end, don't they? Like the Bill Gateses of this world and whatever. So it's just kind of systemizing what's good ethics anyway, I suppose.
Absolutely. And from a recruiter's point of view, how thoroughly rewarding to be placing people into businesses like that are growth minded, nurturing, and progressive thinkers, basically. So you've got to
joy out of that when you do that, both.
You're what, sorry?
You must both get a lot of joy out of those placements that you're talking about, Sarah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's especially Ant and I have been in the game a long time. Yeah. So, I don't know about you. I'm very much of the mind you can always make more money, but you can't make more joy and you can't make more time. So, we fill those the way that we can. And I think if we looked at addressing our social and political landscape, but it's going to take more than 2 or 3 people on a call, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit above our pay grade, but made us start. We put it out there.
Yeah.
And talking of starting, it's time to finish, I'm afraid, folks. We could talk about this for a long, long while, I think. But,
I could bang on for days. We should finish up over a pint somewhere, though, I think, guys.
Amen.
Good idea, Sarah. Before we do our wrap-ups, first of all, Sarah, when and where are you standing as a local councillor?
Oh, probably never. I'm too sweary. I'm too sweary, and B, I'll have people coming up to me in the supermarket going, "They haven't taken my bins again this week," and I'm not sure I could cope.
It's been a pleasure to have you on today, Sarah. Thank you very much. I know Ant wants to thank you as well.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, thanks ever so much for this. We might try and do some kind of a round 2 if you're up for it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for the invite.
No worries. Where can people find you, or do you want to say anything about RecruitRecruit, etc., or your portfolio businesses?
Yeah. Oh no. Well, I will have a quick plug of RecruitRecruit. So we're at www.recruitrecruit.co.uk. We recruit for all sorts because we collaborate with our competitors like Ant. So we do all sorts of things. Our sweet spot really is fast growth startups, because by having that collaborative arm, we are really agile. So, which is about as anti-capitalist as you can get. And you can find me over the next on Thursday, for the next 4 days from Thursday, cycling from London to Paris for cure leukemia. So if anybody would like to donate to cure leukemia, you can either find me on Just Giving. It's Sarah Bishop 72, I think, which is obviously my year of birth and not my age. And thanks for the opportunity to plug.
What about if you wanted to follow your sweary updates about said bicycle journey, Sarah, on Twitter?
I am on Twitter, yeah, and I think that's Sarah Bishop 72. I'm really bad at socials, actually. Yeah, Sarah Bishop 72 on Twitter.
Okay, great. The very best of luck over the next 4 days. And thanks a hell of a lot for joining us again. No doubt we'll see you again soon. That just leaves me to thank Ant for his time as usual. Thanks, Anthony. And thank you all for joining us today for what's been a very lively and interesting discussion. You can find out more about Macstaff at www.macstaff.co.uk. You can follow Ant on all the socials, and you can also find a lot more information about the recruitment industry on the Macstaff YouTube channel. So please check that out when you finish with us today. Just enough time for me to say thanks once again to our guests, Sarah and Ant, and for you for joining us here on Macstaff Live. We'll be back again soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Martin.
Cheers.